Summer run steelhead are one of the most sought after game fish in the world. And fishing summer run on a floating line and a two-handed rod is one of the most effective and most fun techniques there is. I want to show you several different effective techniques used with the floating line. We're going to talk about how to read water, how to fish the surface fly, the near surface fly, and the wet fly in a variety of different water types. Summer run steelhead are available from April through November. There's a lot of different fly fishing techniques that can take summer run steelhead, but I don't know any more exciting ones than fishing them on a floating line. We're swinging flies through a variety of different water types, and when that line pulls tight against the current and that fly begins to swing, whether we're fishing a surface fly, near surface fly, or wet fly, I don't know anything more exciting than that electric grab that we're going to get. Reading water is one of the most important things in understanding how to present your fly with a floating line. But it's those subtleties in presentation that's going to make a huge difference. Whether your fly is moving too slowly, whether it's moving too quickly, whether you should make a long cast or a short cast. We want to show you those subtleties and how effective they are in fishing a broad range of water types. Floating line techniques for summer run steelhead are most effective when water temperatures are between 48 and 64. Water temperatures below 48 is going to require getting your fly down into a deeper level of the water. Water temperatures above 64, there's a slight depletion in dissolved oxygen in the water, and those fish are tired and need to rest. But from 48 to 64, there's no better way to fish steelhead than on a floating line. Fly fishing for summer run steelhead's a hunt, and that's exactly the way you have to look at it. I know that I'm not going to hook a steelhead in every piece of great water I fish, but I have the expectation that I'm going to. And fishing that great water is a lot of fun. Under the best conditions, I might only hook 1 or 2, maybe 3 steelhead in a day. And there'll be plenty of days where I don't hook any. But if you stay with it, you're going to have plenty of days where you might hook 5, 6, maybe 10 fish. You don't have to land them all. It's the hookup that's exciting. Landing fish is nice, but it's the grab in the first run that makes this fish very special. Got him! Oh, here we go. Nice fish. That was a nice soft take. Right where I thought it was, about halfway into the swing. He's coming right at me again. When he's coming at you, you want to reel in. As long as he's coming at you, keep tight on that line. Get in as fast as you can. Just going to keep that rod tip fairly low. Don't get in a hurry right here. Oh yeah, he's a nice fish. Another nice little 1 salt fish. Can't rush these guys in. When they come at you like this and they play in short, you just have to take your time and let them work against the reel. I've got my drag set fairly light right now because just the line going through all these guys on this double-handed rod is enough drag. If it's set too tight, you'll just pull it right out of their mouth. Moving upstream on me a little bit. I'm just going to shift my rod around really slowly, pull them back down. There we go. I like to keep them down below me as much as I can. When they get up above you, there's too much water tension on the line, and you can easily just pull the hook right out of their mouth. And on a larger fish, you can just break it off. She's playing in short. Main thing is we just don't shift this rod tip around too abruptly. When you're keeping it low, you've got a lot more force and tension on that fish. If I got that rod tip up high, she's going to have the leverage advantage on me. Let's just bring her right on in here. Oh, we got to get her head up above water and we'll just slide her in. Right now she's pretty tired and I'm just using the tip of the rod to work as a good shock absorber. I don't want to give her too much more line. She's tired. We want to get her in as soon as we can. Takes one look at me and off she goes. And that's something to remember. All those fish, when you start getting them close to you, when they come right up and see you, be ready. They're going to go on another run again. Every one of those fish acts about the same way. They know they're in trouble. Well, she just got off. It's just as well. If we don't have to handle them, we're going to release them anyway, and if we don't have to handle them, that's even better off. One of the great traits about summer steelhead fishing with a dry line is you don't have to carry a lot of gear. I typically don't wear a vest. I've got my box of flies in the pocket of my waders. I've got a pair of nippers around my neck, my polarized sunglasses, a spool of Tippet material, and I'm ready to go. Choosing the right rod is going to be important to meet the water conditions and the fishing conditions that you're likely to encounter. Big water, where you're likely to encounter big fish, is going to require a bigger rod. Fish that are 10 pounds, 15, 20 pounds are going to require a rod with a lot of power in the mid and butt section. And that's typically 9 and 10 weight rods. On most rivers, you can get by with 6 through 8 weight rods. 12 to 14 foot rods are ideal for tight casting quarters. You can cast underneath overhanging trees, get a little closer to the bank without having to carry so much D-loop behind you, and they're my choice. When I travel up to British Columbia, I'm using rods that go 13.5 to 15 feet. 9 and 10 weight rods are best suited for big water and big fish, and I can handle a broader range of fly sizes. But when I'm on most of our summer run streams in Oregon, Washington, California, I like a rod between 12 and 13 feet for 6, 7, or 8 weight lines. It's important to make sure that your line matches the rod. In other words, if the rod says 8 weight, it might indeed cast an 8 weight, but in all likelihood in today's two-handers, it's going to cast a 9 weight, sometimes even a 10 weight. Make sure you consult with a professional, a strong two-handed casting instructor, to make sure that you've got the right balanced line for the rod. Long rods require big reels, and two purposes for the reel. One is to hold the line and the backing. The other one is to counterbalance the length of the rod. You can see this reel here has got a wide arbor spool. It's very wide in here, so when I reel in, I'm picking up 6 or 7 inches at a time. The drag system on your reel has to be very dependable. You're likely to encounter freezing conditions through hot summer conditions from April through November. And it's the ice that gives the reel drag the most problem. There's many different types of drag systems. You want a drag system that can be set very light to fairly strong. There's a lot of different situations that you'll encounter, and you want to be able to adjust the drag quickly. Most reel drags have a knob on the back side, and just a slight turn, one way or the other, will increase or decrease the drag. Keep it set on a light setting, just light enough to where if the fish grabs hard and goes for a run, it's not going to back spool you or overrun the spool. But you can always tighten up, but it's hard to loosen up when the time comes. So again, consult a professional, buy top quality gear, and don't let that opportunity of a lifetime escape you because your reel freezes up. Having the right tapered leader is important to make sure the fly turns over. I like to have a butt section of at least 24 thousandths diameter. This diameter will meet the end of the fly line, and as the power transfers over and as your fly line unfurls, the leader is going to follow suit. If the butt section is too small, the fly is going to collapse on the water. I like hand-tied knotted leaders. These are sections that start at 24 thousandths, taper down to 22 thousandths. Another knot tapers it down to 15. Another knot tapers it down to 13. Another knot down to 11. That's going to give us that tapered leader that turns the fly over efficiently. Fishing floating lines in a full range of fly sizes are going to require different tippet diameters. Typically I use tippet diameters that are 0x. That means it's 11 thousandths of an inch. But on real low, clear flows, and I might drop my hook size down to a size 10, I often drop down to 2x leaders. This is going to allow the fly to look more lifelike in the surface when it's swinging. If the tippet's too coarse or too stiff, it's going to deaden a lot of the subtle movement the fly has in the riffles as it comes across. Make sure your tippet section is at least 24 inches. When I tie on a new tippet, I'll make it about 30 inches long. And as I tie on flies throughout the course of the day, and that tippet section gets down to about 12 inches, it's time to cut it off and tie on a new one. The best knots for that are the blood knot. Steelhead flies are a lot of fun and show a lot of personality of the tyers that made them. You can go all over the map with steelhead flies. Big flies, small flies, bright flies, and dark flies. It pays to have a good selection of all those. Although steelhead don't give you any credit for fly. In other words, they'll take your car keys when they're in there and they're ready to take the fly, but you'll develop confidence in specific patterns. I like to have a full assortment of flies that cover the bases from large and bright for turbid water. If you just had rainfall and the water's starting to develop a little turbidity and particulate, those bright flies really show up. But as waters start to drop and clear in midsummer and late summer, sometimes steelhead only respond to the small, darker patterns. And these are the patterns that are more suggestive of the aquatic insects that they're likely to encounter during their upriver migration. Get a good selection of topwater skaters and standard wet flies. A topwater skater can be as big as this, which is untied on a size 2 or 4 hook, and it can be quite small, such as the Bugmaster here, tied on size 8s and 10s. I generally like to go with the smaller skaters because, again, that's more a representation of aquatic insects that the fish have been seeing throughout their upriver migration. When I speak of dark patterns, we're talking about colors of black, purple, deep claret. Those are darker, more subdued patterns. Bright patterns will probably be more orange, fuchsia, reds, and for the most part, it's your mid-range, your purples, your clarets, and your blacks that are the most productive. It's easy to go with a hook size that's too big for the conditions, so put on a size 4 or 6 when in doubt. Some of the patterns that I like to include are the tri-colored muddler minnow. And this has been just day in and day out, spring through fall, one of my best standard searching patterns. It fishes right in the surface film, and I call it a damp fly. It's within the first ½ inch of the surface. Topwater wakers and skaters are a lot of fun, and first light in the morning and last evening light, surface skaters provide some of the most spectacular surface action you can ever see. Every cast, your eyes are focused to the swing, and the eruption can be spectacular. A standard wet fly like the Night Dancer is one of the popular favorites. It's got a dark wing, a purple hackle, and a black body. This fly is a great searching pattern, and it's a good comeback wet fly if you've got a pluck or a boil and you want to come back with a darker pattern. This is a Crystal Flash Steelhead Coachman, and this is one of my favorites. Even though it's got a peacock body and a brown hen neck hackle, those are very natural tones. The Crystal Flash and flash blue that I put on the wing provides just a little extra sparkle, and in first morning light and late evening light, I think it's a real advantage. The Rusty Bomber is one of my favorite topwater skaters. I've been using this fly for almost 20 years, and it's accounted for more steelhead on the surface than any 3 others combined. This shows you the dramatic range between wet fly sizes. I've got a Max Canyon on a size 6 hook, and I've got a Steelhead Coachman on a size 10. These are both terrific steelhead flies. The size 6 Max Canyon is a great all-around wet fly used in medium flows, but when that river starts to get warm and clear, I like to use a size 10 Steelhead Coachman. These are going to require different tippet diameters when we fish them. This is going to be 0x or 10-pound tippet for the Max Canyon, and I sometimes drop down to 2x or 6-pound tippet for the small Steelhead Coachman. Don't be afraid to change patterns, but on the other hand, when you've gone through a prime piece of steelhead water and you've fished it clean, your swings are nice, your casts are good, and you two-step down the run, don't think but just because you change fly patterns that all of a sudden the fish are going to be there. If they're there, they're going to move to the fly. A selection of fly patterns is going to give you the opportunity to change patterns on a player fish or one that's moved to the fly already. That's the most important time to change. But develop a taste for a pattern, leave that pattern on, and fish it with confidence. This is my favorite wallet of old summer steelhead flies too, but these flies are best suited for sinking lines. These large bunny leeches and general practitioners and marabou flies lend themselves better to be fished down in the mid-water column and down right along the bottom substrate. That's when these materials really begin to work. If I were to fish a fly like this on a floating line, it would stay puffed up full of air right on the surface until we lost nearly half the swing. I would only cover a very small amount of water if I used these on a floating line. Steelhead hold in a wide range of water types. What we're looking for is good fly water. They hold in flats, tailouts, pocket water, riffles. They hold in head ends of pools. They'll hold in back eddies. They'll hold in a wide range of water, some of which is not effectively fished with the fly. What we're going to concentrate on is identifying water types that fish the fly well. Behind me is a perfect example of what a flat looks like. This is water that ranges from 3 to 5 feet. In this case, it's running over bedrock ledges. Bedrock ledges are a prime holding area for steelhead. They like to hold in the pockets in the recessed areas of the ledges. They'll hold right in against the ledge. So anywhere where a ledge drops off to slightly deeper water, expect the steelhead to hold there. What makes this great fly water is the water above these ledges is deep, slow, with several reverse back eddies in it. And there's a magic line, kind of an imperceptible line, where all of a sudden the current pushes out in a smooth flow. It's roughly the same speed from Center River to our bank. You can see the foam line. The foam line coming down is an indicator where all the currents begin to merge and the steelhead like to lay on the edges of those foam lines. I'm going to cast just beyond the outside ledge. And if you're in a high position, you can see where the ledge drops off to deeper water. The fish are going to lay right on the outside edge or the inside edge of that ledge. So it's important for me to get my cast 25, 30 feet beyond the ledge and let it come through in a nice concentric swing. When I start this water that's got imperceptible current speeds in it, I start much higher than I think where the prime water is. In other words, I'm going to wade into this slow, slack water fairly high up, and I'm going to begin my cast. If the current's not pulling the line right, I'm not getting the correct fly speed, then I'm going to slowly wade down until I find that correct current and that correct fly speed. That's when I start to get fishy. Flat water is ideal to fish a number of different methodologies. We can use skating flies. The flat water is spectacular because you can see the big V wake that comes off the skaters. The fish can see it well too. It's also good for grease line technique where we're fishing small wet flies right below the surface film, maybe a half an inch, quarter of an inch below the surface. It's also ideal for deeper wet fly swings. Or you can use sinking lines or sink tip lines. You can use the full range of fishing methodologies in flat water. The bottom substrate can change dramatically in flats. Here behind me is a perfect example of what the ledge rock looks like. And you can see the ledge rock right out in front of me. The water flows 2 feet over the ledge rock and then drops off immediately into 4 to 5 feet of water. Again, this is an ideal holding area for steelhead. As you work down the flat, it's typical to come into some boulder areas where the boulders during high water have settled in. It's along these boulders at the bottom end of these flats where steelhead like to hold. They'll hold in front of the boulders typically, but they'll also rest against the side, and maybe depending on the depth of how far the boulder's below the surface, they'll rest between 5 and 20 feet behind the boulder. These boulders is where you should concentrate and pay particular attention to the speed of your fly. As your fly comes through these boulders slowly, you're going to have to mend and control the line so you don't get too much belly. Below me is a typical example of how these boulders might position themselves. When I look out here, I see the uppermost boulder, and even though you may not be able to see the rock, you'll be able to see the wake of water flow over the rock and create that V. We've got several V's in close to us, and that water is only about 18 to 24 inches deep. It may hold a fish, but I'm more interested in the boulders that are out just a little bit further. We've got the top boulder that a steelhead could easily lay in front of, and the best boulder in here as I look at the water is the one directly off of me 30 feet. That boulder directly out in front of me 30 feet off the bank is big enough to hold a number of fish. Typically a fish will lay in front of the boulder, but it's deep enough behind the boulder and the far side, Center River side of the boulder where the fish will lay right on that edge. The upstream end of each one of these V's indicates the rock, and in front of that rock's a pillow of water. And as the current comes down and pushes against the front of that rock, it creates that neutralized current speed. That pillow of water creates a nice cushion and a soft water spot for the steelhead to hold there. It's in front of the rock where the best steelhead lie is. As the fly swings behind the rock and gets sucked into that back eddy, into that V, that's where it gets difficult to control the fly. Just swim it through the best you can. As your fly comes below that rock, 15 or 20 feet, the current evens out the flow again, and your fly's got a great presentation. As we continue fishing down the flat, we get down to the bottom end of the flat, and now we're talking about a tail out. As the fish come up through this heavy riffle water below me, they'll lay in this tail out and then move up into the flat. But they'll lay into the tail out for the longest. As the fish negotiate this fast boulder strewing water below, as soon as they come up into this tail out and get that nice smooth flow of water, it's the boulders in this tail out that will hold the fish most consistently, and they'll hold them for the longest period of time. This is a broad tail out with good even speed. It's perfect water to skate, fish a waking fly, fish a damp fly, fish a wet fly, or a sink tip. As the fish come out of this big riffle water below, they'll spread out to both sides. Our side is the best because it's got big boulders in it. If you look right below this rock, you can see the washboard effect. As your fly gets into the washboard right down below, it looks too fast and too shallow to hold fish. But that washboard's telling you that there's big structure underneath. And as the water flows over that big structure, it slows down the current. This is where steelhead like to lie. So when in doubt, if it looks too fast or too shallow, fish it through anyway. You'll know a couple of passes through that piece of water whether it's going to consistently hold fish or not. I'll fish a big broad tail out like this, clear down to the standing whitewater waves. Not all productive steelhead flatwater has big stone bottom and big ledge rock. Some of the most productive has fine cobble and weed beds. The bottom of this flat won't hold steelhead in it for a long period of time, but they've just come out of a series of strong, fast pocket water, and they're going to hold in this water for 1 to 5 hours before they move on. When I begin fishing a flat, I'm going to start in about knee-deep water. And I'm going to work my cast out slowly till I get to my comfortable casting distance or to the outside edge of the holding water. This is a big river. We've got 250 feet across from bank to bank, and I'll be very pleased if I can fish the middle 100 feet back in. So my cast is going to go over the main current seam held out in the center of the river here and swung all the way in till it's on the dangle below me. I want to make sure that I'm fishing that fly all the way in, even if it's in 18 to 24 inches of water, because the steelhead will follow it in these flats for a long distance. It's not uncommon for a steelhead to follow the fly during its swing for 25 or 30 feet and grab it right on the dangle. I'll continue fishing this flat all the way through until we get down to the tailout. As we get to the tailout, you can see again the water begins to accelerate a little bit. It's also got a little bit more of a disturbed surface, indicating there's bigger rock, bigger boulders, perhaps even ledges out there. But the fish, when they come out of this broken water below us, they'll lay into the first cushion or pillow of water they can find. And the tail out of this run is long-term holding water. This river's too wide to fish from bank to bank, so I'm going to concentrate on fishing 100, maybe 110 feet out toward this bank. As the fish come up through that long, slick V, they're going to push over to this bank or the other bank. This bank's got more rock structure, better holding water, and this is the side to fish it on. This is classic riffle water. The water is going to be between 3 and 5 feet deep with a fair amount of fast, broken water above it. This water here, you can see, drops elevation. And just as it drops elevation, it forms those series of white water riffles. Below it is a good steady stream of water between 3 and 5 feet deep that'll hold a lot of steelhead. What you want to look for is riffle water above a big drop or fast chutes. Right below me is a fast, narrow chute where the water rages through a small crevice of rock. Above it, the river opens up, it widens out. On this bank, the water's fast and deep with a lot of back eddies. It doesn't fish the fly well. On the opposite side, the water's got the perfect depth and the perfect structure to hold steelhead. They're going to rest from 5 minutes to 5 hours in this type of water before they continue their migration up. Ideally, the best place to fish this water is position yourself 20 or 30 feet up in the whitewater break. That way your first few casts are going to drop into that riffle right below the break. Always position yourself high up and work down into the riffle. The fish will commonly nose within 3 to 5 feet away from the bottom whitewater seam. As you look up this riffle run, it's got a very fast seam running right down the middle. You don't have to fish the whole run. You're only going to cast from the center of the seam and swing it to the far bank. This is not going to require a long cast. 25 to 50 foot casts are going to cover this water beautifully. They'll lay in this riffle water throughout the day, and as the light starts to get dim late in the afternoon and early evening, they'll push onward over this riffle and into the tail out above. But I want to get them during their resting period. So if I'm here at first light in the morning or last light in the evening, this is going to be the best opportunity to find fish in the riffles. This is an ideal example of what an inside shoulder looks like. The shoulder's formed as the water breaks over this shallow gravel bar on the far side and begins to fan out towards Center River. It's along this current seam from Center River right up closer to the bank as you get closer to the Riffle, and it's right along that little line, that little edge, that inside shoulder that the Steelhead will hold. It's real easy to wade out too far on these inside shoulders. The Steelhead like to lay in 2 to 5 feet of water. 2 feet of water on this inside shoulder is about 10 feet off the bank. The great thing about the Spey rod is we can position ourselves close to the bank and make sure that that fly is swinging all the way in against the bank before we take our next step down. It's real easy to overwade this water, and the average guy might wade out to about thigh-high water, and at that point he's past the ideal holding water for the Steelhead. The Steelhead can follow it from 50 to 60 feet to Center River clear to the bank before they grab. The takes in this kind of water are often fast and furious. This is the kind of water that you want to two-step down. You always start off with a short cast as we discussed before, but once you get out to the proper casting distance, at the end of each swing you want to make sure you give it a big two-step. This is long water. This piece of water goes on for 250 yards, and we want to get through it as fast as we can so we can go down to the next piece of water and increase our chances of finding Steelhead. This is some of my favorite kind of water. We've got a big rock reef that extends 3/4 of the way across the river, and we've got prime depth, 3 to 6 feet deep. The current speed's about the speed at which I can walk down this water, which is ideal. And it's the same speed and the same depth from Center River to my bank. The fish won't hold on the far side. You can see the water's too fast. Way too much current coming in there. And as they work up, they'll fan out onto our bank and they'll lie in and amongst all these big boulders, weed beds, and ledges along this piece of water. When I fish this piece of water, I want to start as high up in this piece of water as I can. As the water falls off this big rock reef, it's deep. So when I step out in the water, it's already 3.5 to 4 feet deep. The beauty is it stays that depth all the way across. So even though I'm in deep water, I'm going to start off with a short cast, gradually working my casting distance out until my cast is out near the fast water. That way I can cover all the water in from the fast seam on the far side all the way to my bank. I'll start at the top end of this pool, but I'll continue working down the pool until I get down into this shallower riffle water. Below me, still classic riffle water. It's got big cobbles, big stones, lots of weed beds, and this run will continue to fish down for several hundred yards. But I'm the most excited right below the rock reef because that's where the fish have got a hold. This is an all-time classic example of what a great tailout and a riffle look like in combination. If you scan down below us right here, we've got a great tailout that's got perfect speed, about the speed of a man's walk. We've got great depth, 5 to 6 feet from bank to bank. We've also got a place where the Steelhead come up over this rock reef and they're going to fan into this tailout and rest every day. It's important when you fish this tailout that you fish the fly all the way through and just inches above the rocks that form the reef below us. A lot of times the fish will lay in the cushion of that water that's pressing against those rocks. So what seemingly your fly is getting into the fast water, you're just getting into the good water. So start the run just at the bottom of the pool where the water begins to accelerate out. Fish it clear through the tailout and make sure you fish it within inches of this rock reef because the fish will lay into the cushion or the pillow of that water current just above the rocks. Techniques that work the best in these tailouts are waking and skating surface flies. When I see a piece of water like this, the hair on my arms start to raise up because I don't know if you can get better steelhead waking and skating water than this. But it adapts well to the swinging fly. So a swinging wet fly or a deep sunk fly and a sink tip are also great techniques for this type of water. We're in classic steelhead flat water, and this water is about the same depth from the far bank to where I'm standing. The bottom of this river right now has got a lot of ledge rock channels, and those fish are going to lay in those troughs. I could easily get a steelhead on my first cast with about 3 feet of fly line off this long rod. I might also get a fish all the way down as I work out my line a little bit longer each subsequent cast until I get to my comfortable casting distance. At that time, I'm going to work down this run 2 paces at a time until we get down into the riffle water down below. Flats are an ideal piece of water to fish the waking and skating surface fly. I've got a little hair fly right here that's got a little foam on it, and that's going to keep it planing right up on top. It's important that I use a little bit of foam, particularly when I'm using the Spey rod, because the fly spends so much time in the water without casting in a traditional manner of back casts and forecasts. The fly doesn't get a chance to dry out. So we put a little foam on top of the fly to keep it right up on top. It's also got a little bit of a curved up head of foam, and that's going to actually plane against the surface and give us the most dramatic waking and skating effect. We're going to start off with a short cast. I could easily get a fish on my first cast. And with that, I want to make sure I've got a little slack line pulled off my reel right here. It's easy to get excited and make that first cast without having this slack line, and if fish were to grab, we don't have that slack line to release. It's going to be important to let the fish come up, grab the fly, pull that slack line out, and then we've got them hooked solidly in the corner of the mouth. I don't have much line here right now, so I'm just going to overhead cast this rod just like I would a traditional single-handed rod. And I'm fishing this short cast exactly the same as my best 50, 60, 70 foot cast. And we just put it across and slightly down, and we're following the rod tip as the fly swings across the current. It's really important to get this fly working correctly that we turn the cast over cleanly. What I mean by that is the line, leader, and the fly has to roll out in a nice tight line so the fly begins to fish effectively on the touchdown of the surface. And my heart's beating right now because I've cooked many steelhead in this kind of water in tight. When presenting a fly, a skating or waking fly in the flats, it's absolutely ideal if the current speed from center river to where you're standing is about even. In other words, when that fly turns over, I don't have to mend or manipulate the line much in order to get that fly to come across at a nice, smooth, and even pace. We're going to work out each cast in about 2 foot increments, and that way I'm covering every foot of water. The fly's got to turn over clean, and right here we still have a short cast. My rod tip is raised up a little bit because now I've got a little bit better control on bringing the rod tip around and skating that fly across this flat at about the same speed as the flat's moving down. That's absolutely critical. In other words, once the fly turns over and starts its down and across swing, we want that fly to come across at about the same speed as the current's moving downward. That's the classic presentation. I'm going to keep working out my cast in 2 foot increments. I've got enough line now where I can give it sort of a Spey cast. I don't have much room behind me. Fly turned over nicely. I don't have to mend. I can just hold my rod out here for a while. The fly begins to swing tightly on the surface. It's making a terrific wake, and I'm just bringing my line, my rod right across, following the fly. When it gets near the end of the swing, I'm slightly leading the fly, but it's careful not to pull the fly. I don't want to move the rod too far to the bank, because if we pull the fly, it's going to cause the fly to move upstream. I'm going to let this fly swing all the way down until it's no longer moving. And it's that last 3, 4, 5 feet that's critical, because sometimes a fish will follow it over that far before they grab it. We don't want to become too quick in moving the fly out of that downstream dangle. I feel comfortable with that now. 2 more feet, and we're just going to continue to work out line in those 2 foot increments until we get to our comfortable casting distance, or till we get to the distance that we no longer need to cast, meaning that I don't want to overcast the lie. Even if we can cast 120 feet in this water, the currents are so much different 120 feet out that I'd lose control on the skating fly. So I'm going to cast just far enough out to where the line tightens up quickly and I have nice even current speed bringing that fly across. We've got about 40 feet of line out here right now, and I'm still keeping my rod tip fairly high as the fly comes skating across. It's important to do that because I'm reducing the amount of line tension on the water, and that allows that fly to move with a little more freedom. As I work out a little bit more line, I'll probably drop my rod tip down a little bit. But in this position, where it gets tricky is when a fish comes up to grab that skater, I'm going to have to immediately drop my rod tip down like this, allow this slack line to feed through my fingers to get them hooked solidly in the corner of the mouth. If that line was taut right against the reel, when that fish were to come up and grab that fly, he's got nowhere to turn without feeling line tension, at which time he's likely to let it go. The currents are going to begin to change out here as we get a little bit further out. I'm going to have to begin to mend the line. Right here, I'm going to slightly mend what we call a 3/4 mend, moving just 3/4 of the fly line slightly upstream. And again, my rod tip is lowered a little bit more now because I've got a little bit more line out, and I'm following that slight J formation on the line as my fly comes across. In other words, as that fly touches down, we want a little bit of a belly in the line, and that allows the fly to come across at a nice constant speed. Too much belly in the line, and it'll come across at an accelerated speed, and we really lose the effectiveness of the skater. Not enough belly in the line, and it just kind of hangs and bobbles out there in one spot, and then it'll begin to pick up and come across. We want to move that fly at a constant speed. Each cast, we're working out another 2 feet of line. This cast, you'll notice I've got my rod tip even a little bit closer to the water right here. And now I'm crossing a couple of different current speeds right now. I'm going to have to mend the line several times. When I mend the line, it's important that I don't just flip it out there. I want to lift the rod tip up, bring the line upstream, and drop my rod tip down a little bit. That gives me the most control without moving the fly. Now as we move down the run, I'm staying with that comfortable casting distance. We don't have to start in short again. I'm stripping in a little bit of line right now. I'm going to make my steps downstream. Three-quarter mend, get my loop ready. Half line mend, never taking my eyes off the fly, and allowing that rod tip just to follow the belly of the line as the fly comes down and across. As we increase the distance of the cast, we also have to allow more time for this skater to come across. This is where we have to be patient. I can see that skater's coming across at a perfect speed, a nice even speed across this flat, and it begins to slow down just a little bit as it approaches the dangle. This is where I've got to have even more patience. Keeping the rod tip down, this loop is tucked very lightly against the cork in my finger, because as that fish comes up to grab that fly, I'm going to release that line lightly through the cork and my finger to allow the fish to come up, grab the fly, and turn without feeling resistance against the line. If a wet maple leaf were to come down right now and hook onto that fly, that would be enough tension to allow this line just to slip right out between my fingers and the cork. And I'm going to let this fly dangle down. It's no longer moving. I give it about the count of 3, and I make my strips in as I step down the run a couple of more paces. Not every fish in this flat is going to come to a skater. In fact, it's my preferred choice. First thing in the morning, when the water's calm like this fishing the skater is ideal. I expect these fish, because they've rested all night, to come to the fly with a fair amount of aggression. But still, not every fish in the lie is going to come to a service skater. We're only looking for a small percentage of fish that have that aggressive tendency. I know that if I get down to this riffle and I haven't moved the fish on a skating fly, that one of my options is to come back with a wet fly and fish it 3 or 4 inches below the surface. Remember, I can't emphasize that first mend strong enough. As soon as that line touches down, get that mend in there, set the fly up, get your slack line built into the cast. In other words, once I make the mend, I pull whatever slack line's left in the line out to form my loop and pinch it against my cork. We'll do that again on the next cast. There we go. Cast, mend, slack line, loop. It's that simple. Cast, mend, slack line right against the cork. And right here I've got a little half line mend. Perfect. We still maintain the integrity of that slight J formation in the line. And I'm just going to let the rod tip come around and follow the line in against the shore. As this fly is coming through the V of this little tail out, right above that choppy riffle, this is the most practical place the steelhead's going to be. I'm really on guard right in here. I know that the first fish that comes up through that break is going to lay in this little flat, and that's the most likely place to get a grab. I'm still moving through the run at a fairly fast pace, and I know that this water looks good. I'm still not going to make a cast in the same spot over and over again. I've got to go to the fish. So I'm going to continue my steps downriver. These ledges are pretty tricky down here. One step's high, the next one's a couple feet lower. The rise form on a surface skater sometimes can be very subtle. Sometimes no more impression on the water than the fly just disappearing. It's a very visual take, meaning that I've got to keep my eye on the fly to make sure that that doesn't happen. Other times it looks like you just threw a boulder right against the fly. Other times it's a multiple number of boils on the fly. Most people, as soon as they see that boil or the fly drop down, they immediately lift up on the rod tip and try to set the hook. It's absolutely critical that you keep the rod tip down, let the loop go out, and let a couple revolutions of the reel turn a little bit before you raise the rod tip. You don't have to set the hook. These hooks are very sharp, the points are fine, and they go into the fish's mouth easily. In fact, it's the weight of the fish pulling against this slack line that really impales the hook into the tissue. Wild fish are more aggressive to the surface fly than their hatchery cousins simply because they've had a longer rearing habitat in the natural environment. Juvenile steelhead will spend 1 to 3 years in the freshwater environment feeding on aquatic insects before they outmigrate to the ocean. This is when they develop that conditioned reflex to feed voraciously on surface and subsurface aquatic insects. For the same reason a cat chases a ball of yarn across your living room floor is the same reason I like to think a steelhead will come up and eat the fly. It's just a conditioned reflex that it can't refuse. You roll that ball across the floor at a nice even speed and that cat's predatory instincts are going to kick in and it's going to jump on that piece of yarn. And that's the same reason that we've got to fish this fly across at just the right speed. If it comes whipping across like a water skier on the back of a powerboat, the fish is going to lose interest, lose track of the fly and not grab it. If it comes across too slowly, it may not trigger that conditioned reflex to come up and grab it. But if it comes down and across at the same speed of the current, that's proven to be the most effective speed, and I have confidence that that fish will come up and take this fly. Surface flies come in a variety of different designs. Some of them are skaters and wakers that are meant to be right up on top of the water and provide the most dramatic V-wake behind the fly. Other types of surface flies are what we call damp flies. And those flies are designed where they might sputter up to the surface, drop down right below the surface film and sputter back up again. And that's a terrific way to fish a natural looking imitation. When bugs are trying to escape this surface film, they often get trapped in below the surface and can't escape right away. So if it drops down, if your surface skater drops down below the surface and you lose track of it for a minute, not a big deal. It'll come back up again, it'll pop back up again, and certainly when a fish comes to take that fly, you're still going to see the big boiling wake. This is likely looking water, and I expected a steelhead to come to this waking and skating fly all the way down this flat. It didn't happen. Doesn't mean there's not steelhead in here, it just means that we couldn't find one to come up to the surface. It's such beautiful water that I'm likely to go through this piece of water again with a wet fly and fish it just a couple of inches below the surface. There's no doubt about it that the wet fly will move a few more fish than the surface skater, but there's nothing more exciting than bringing a fish up to the top. We're going to start off with a short cast. I could easily get a fish on my first cast. But the line, leader, and the fly has to roll out in a nice tight line so the fly begins to fish effectively on the touchdown of the surface. We're going to work out each cast in about 2-foot increments, and that way I'm covering every foot of water. I don't want to overcast the line. Even if we can cast 120 feet in this water, the currents are so much different 120 feet out that I'd lose control on the skating fly. As we get a little bit further out, I'm going to have to begin to mend the line. We want a little bit of a belly in the line, and that allows the fly to come across at a nice constant speed. As we increase the distance of the cast, we also have to allow more time for this skater to come across. This is where we have to be patient, and it begins to slow down just a little bit as it approaches the dangle. This is where I've got to have even more patience. Don't give up hope on the skater. Have confidence in it. The only way to be successful fishing a service skater is to put it on and leave it on. And I'll go back to it later on today for sure. But this water really is ideal wet fly water. And it's got a little more broken surface, and I can present this wet fly through there just below the service film and expect those steelhead to come up and grab it. Right at the top end of this riffle below me is a series of boulders, just a little boulder reef, and the steelhead like to lay in front of rocks. There's a cushion of water that pushes against that rock, and they can lay there effortlessly. I'm going to start off with a short cast just like we did with the skater, and it's important to fish that short cast like it's your best long one. And I'm just going to throw it out there and not fidget with the rod tip, have my loop of line ready to go. It's tucked lightly against my cork, and I'm just going to fish this across in a nice down and across swing. It's very similar angle of presentation as with our skating waking fly. And in this water here, I'm going to angle it not quite 90 degrees across, but about 60 degrees across. My next cast is going to be 2 feet longer. I don't even have to mend. I've got so much line control with the long rod and the short cast that I can control this fly as it comes across by just bringing my rod tip down and following the current speed all the way to the bank. You don't want to push it. I don't want to lead it with the rod tip, but just kind of follow it down. And again, those fish can follow it during the swing, and it's not uncommon for them to grab it on the hang down. So I'll fish it until the fly's no longer swinging. Let it pause there for just a couple of seconds. Strip out your couple of feet. Make the next cast. And again, as soon as the fly touches down, we want to make our mend, pull out our slack line, and follow that J-shaped formation in that down across swing. Each cast is about 2 feet longer, and we're just going to make these nice concentric arcs down the run until we get our effective fishing distance out. Cast, make that mend, and I'm mending right down to the line leader junction. If I didn't mend to the line leader junction, the fly would still be slightly upstream from the downstream belly of the line, and it would accelerate too quick through this prime water. It's real easy to get fidgety and start moving the rod tip around and start casting a little bit too early. Be patient. For every steelhead that grabs your wet fly, you probably have 3 or 4 follow it and refuse it. You don't know it, you can't see it, there's no sign of it when they don't come up close enough to the surface. We've got good distance here now. I'm effectively covering the water where the fish is going to lay. I'm going to start making my 2 steps downstream. I've got my rod tip angled slightly down at the water. When that line comes tight against the fish, I want that line to be able to pull smoothly and freely through the guides. Getting a little downstream belly right there. I'm going to mend that up, raise the rod tip, over, lower the rod tip down. We didn't move the fly. We knew from fishing the service skater that any erratic movement of the rod tip can move the fly. So we want to be really careful to make those mends nice and gentle. Steelhead will come to the fly in a variety of different ways. Sometimes you just feel a small peck, and that's a fish that's just lifting up from the bottom. They touch the fly. That little touch creates just a little peck feel on the line. If that's the case, stay in the same spot and make that cast again. It may be a steelhead, maybe a little resident trout, maybe a whitefish, but you don't want to take the chance on missing an opportunity. Other times that fly is coming around and you feel a more substantial weight on the line, and that would be called a pluck or a pull. A pluck is where that line tightens up just a little bit and you know there's some weight there and it releases. And that's a fish that came up, turned on the fly, touched it, and then let it go. But there's definitely some substantial weight there. We often define a little heavier grab as a pull. Well, they might even come up, take the fly, and pull out 6, 8, 12 inches of line. Sometimes 2 feet of line. Sometimes the entire loop right here will pull out, and then it releases. That fish is what we call a player, and he can often be enticed to come back with another presentation, sometimes a fly change. These conditions couldn't be any better. There's not a steelheader around that doesn't love this high overcast and a slight drizzle. That lengthens our fishing day. Steelhead are fairly sun sensitive, and with this high overcast, we can have effective fishing throughout the entire day. We're coming down into this riffle now, and this riffle's caused by a little reef of rock. And steelhead love rock. In fact, the bigger the bottom, the rockier the bottom, the better the habitat for the steelhead to lay in. They're looking for water that's going to slow down a little bit, and that rock slows that current flow down. There we go. There we go. Fish on. Hey! Well, I knew they were in here this morning. It felt too good. I don't know why we couldn't find one on a skater, but they sure like this wet fly. It's a really good idea to come back prime water once you've gone down with the skater and you feel confident in it. Put on a wet fly and just make a double check. Works almost every time. That fish took that loop out so fast that I didn't have to react. He's coming right into me. Oh baby, every steelhead's awesome. The fish is in pretty low. We're going to keep that rod tip pretty close to the water. If I held that rod tip up a little bit higher, I'd take too much chance of pulling the hook right out of the fish's mouth. A lot of head shaking going on down there. Just kind of keeping low sideways pressure. I think we'll be able to bring this beautiful little fish in fairly quick. The best way to land these fish is staying right out here in the river. I don't need to drag this fish into the bank. It's pretty tired. I'm going to get its head right up. Once the head's right up, that fish is ready to come in. Just bring him right into me. Come on, big fella. Got him right here. There we go, big guy. I'm going to swing downstream and bring the fish just so it's not fighting that current. Nice little hatchery buck. They're all fun. Keep them in the current. Let them get a little strength left. This guy's got a ton of energy. Adios, buddy. That was a nice little hatchery buck, and we got him just at the top of this outside rock. This is that rock reef that we were talking about earlier. It's a good sign because we took that fish up high in the run, and chances are he's going to have brothers and sisters that are down below it. I'm going to start in again short, and thinking that those fish would have had a chance to move up right up above these rocks again. So I don't want to just cast another long line, but we're going to start in short just like we did as we first started this little run. And I've got not more than just about a rod length of fly line. We'll make our cast. strip out our arm's length of loop, pinch lightly against the cork, and we're just going to work down in here. Oftentimes those fish will travel in pairs, sometimes little pods of 6 or 8. And just because you hooked the fish out there and he thrashed up that water a little bit, those other fish won't leave. That doesn't bother him a bit. In fact, I've often had the privilege of watching steelhead being played in clear water, and I watch other fish in the run follow that steelhead around like it's got something that they want. So I'm fishing down this run again with great confidence. We're going to start off with a short cast. I could easily get a fish on my first cast. We're going to work out each cast in about 2-foot increments, and that way I'm covering every foot of water. As soon as the fly touches down, we want to make our mend, pull out our slack line, and follow that J-shaped formation in that down across swing. Following the current speed all the way to the bank. You don't want to push it. I don't want to lead it with the rod tip, but just kind of follow it down. Another great technique is to be able to use 2 flies at once. And I've got a standard size 6 wet fly on the point fly, and I'm going to put on a sliding fly. And the sliding fly I like to use is some kind of surface skater. I'm going to attach that about 5 feet up above the point fly or the wet fly, and we're going to call it a slider because it's going to slide up and down in the butt section of my leader and stop right here on the blood knots. What I do is measure it out about an arm length away, about 4.5 or 5 feet. Come right up to that measurement and just go ahead and cut your leader right there. I've got a rusty bomber on, and this is a really great topwater skater. It suggests the Dicas micas caddis or October caddis. I'm going to thread the butt section right up through the eye of this up eye skater and let it slide right on down to the next knot. At this point, we're just going to tie a blood knot, and that blood knot's actually going to be large enough where it won't slide through the eye of the rusty bomber. Cut this knot off here, tie a standard blood knot, 5 turns around, up through the center, 5 turns around the other side. Cinch that blood knot up tightly and cut the tag ends off, leaving just about 1 millimeter of tag end on each side. This will help ensure that the bomber now will come right on down to that blood knot, and the blood knot securely holds it there at the eye. This fly might move when I cast between the next blood knot up above it and the blood knot that holds it down from sliding to the point fly, but this skater will ride up on top, and the point fly about 4 feet behind it will make it a very good attractor. It's important, as with the other techniques, that we start off with that short cast. And I'm just going to eyeball the skater. The skater is the first fly off the line leader connection, and that skater is going to skate right across. The wet fly is actually going to be submerged. And I'm going to keep my eye right on that skater. What makes this technique so effective is that from the fish's perspective, he's watching 2 flies come down now instead of just 1. The topwater skater probably gets him excited, and as a predatory instinct, that fish is going to see the skater struggling, trying to break the surface film. The wet fly's right behind it, chasing it, and it creates kind of a predatory movement for the fish to come up. Most of the fish come up on the point fly or the wet fly. About 30% of the fish come up on the skater. Why that happens is once we get our normal casting distance out there and we begin to move down the run by two-stepping it, once in a while a fish will come up and eyeball the point fly, not take it, not show itself with any visible sign on the surface. The next cast down after your steps, he's going to see the skating fly come over him. At that point, he's got two opportunities now to be able to take that fly. It's a terrific follow-up technique for taking fish that you didn't see come to the point fly when it first went over them. It's absolutely essential that you watch the flies when you cast them. In other words, when I lift my line up to take it out of the water for the next cast, I'm visually inspecting both flies to make sure they're not fouled. It's real easy to make a bad cast, and if the flies get fouled, you're going to make a poor presentation. So get used to watching that skater come across on the swing. That's my indicator. And during the cast, as soon as I lift up to set my next cast, I'm watching those flies come up. They're nicely separated. Cast them out. Now you have to open up your loop just a little bit when casting two flies. You'll feel a little more resistance in the cast, there's no doubt about that, but it's still an easy setup to maneuver and to cast. Go slow and easy and watch every cast between presentations to make sure the flies are not fouled. Fishing two flies like this is a great way to understand line speed when your fly's coming across the riffle. In other words, I can visually see my skater come across, and when I man the line, either upstream or downstream, I can see if the line is moving that skater. This is a great teaching tool in understanding mending and how it affects the fly movement in the water. When I'm casting, I'm going much slower, being very, very careful to keep that loop open and not to tangle those flies. You can shorten up just a little bit. You don't have to try those super long monster casts using this technique. If those flies get too far away from you, either downstream on the hang down or toward the center river on the cast, it's difficult to control the speed of two flies or to see if they're tangled or not. Got him! Ho-ho, baby! That was a long time in coming. There he goes. That's just as well. I put a little force on him and the hook just slid right out. But that's just as well. We got a good look at him. About a nice 6-7 pound hatchery buck. If I don't have to touch him, that's good enough for me. It's important, as with the other techniques, that we start off with that short cast. It's absolutely essential that you watch the flies when you cast them. In other words, I'm visually inspecting both flies to make sure they're not fouled. Now you have to open up your loop just a little bit when casting two flies. Go slow and easy and watch every cast between presentations to make sure the flies are not fouled. Fishing two flies like this is a great teaching tool in understanding mending and how it affects the fly movement in the water. Great water. It's been consistently good water throughout our season. I'm going to go back through it with a sink tip line. In which case I've chosen a type 3 sink tip. It's 15 feet long and it just attaches to the floating line section of my Spey line. I've got a leader that's just under 3 feet long and a larger fly that's going to pulsate more underneath the surface. It's got a lot of Marabou type material in it and a little bit of flash, and it might produce a fish where the small sparse surface fly didn't. Again, we're going to start off with a short cast. Get that slack line loop ready. And I'm going to fish this almost exactly the same way as we did with our floating line and our near surface fly, working out in the same systematic approach, a couple of feet each cast. The Type 3 is going to allow us to get the fly about 1.5 to 2 feet below the surface. And that might produce results where the fish didn't want to come up through that lower water column to the surface. Water temperature is just hovering right at 48, and that's kind of the magic temperature in which fish don't want to move a lot. Now, fishing a sinking tip line, you really have to control the belly of the line in order to control the tip that's subsurface. As that tip penetrates down through the water column, it's going to slow down. The surface speed is running about 4 or 5 miles an hour right now, and as the tip sinks down in that lower water column, it's going to slow down to about half of that. So I have to mend a little bit more with my floating line that's right up on top than I would if I was fishing just a floating line. I'm trying to slow the speed of that fly down to more match the speed of the water that's below the surface. And again, I'm letting it come down all the way until it stops below me before I let another 2 feet of line out. One of the great beauties about the Spey rod, or the two-handed rod, is we can throw floating lines and sinking lines alike. It really doesn't change the cast. The same cast that we're using for our floating lines will work identical with our sinking lines. I'm going to put another mend in that. The line's sinking right now, and another mend to slow it down. The line's just straightened out below me. One more small mend to slow her down and let that sinking line come right across. It's a little bit slower. In other words, you have to take a little more time when you're fishing a sinking tip line. It might slow me down. Instead of working through this piece of water in 30 minutes, now it might take me 45. The swing's slower, and the speed in which I work down the run is going to be a little slower. My rod tip's in the same position. I still have the loop pinched very lightly against the cork, and I'm mending 3 or 4 times throughout the swing, careful not to move the sinking line or the fly. I just want to control the belly of the floating line, which will slow the speed of the sinking line down in that mid-water column. It takes a little bit of time to set the fly up. Once I've made my cast, we have to allow that sinking line to penetrate through the surface into the mid-water column before we start to fish it. There is some setup time involved. Once I make my cast, my first mend is just enough to force the sinking tip down below the floating belly. I've made my cast, a big mend, which puts the sink tip downstream of my belly, one more mend to slow it down, one more mend to allow it all to straighten out, lower my rod tip down, and let the fly swing across in a nice, smooth, broadside swing. The takes are going to be about the same as on a floating line. They could just almost yank the loop right out of my hand. Other takes are so subtle it feels like I just barely touched bottom. We'll keep working a little more line out here. Big mend. One more mend to slow it all down. One mend to straighten it all out. And now it's about 3/4 downstream. I'm just going to let it swing around a nice slow swing. As my fly comes around near the end of the swing, into that softer water, the sink tip is going to want to drop down into the next water column. Occasionally get hung up on the bottom. You have to be very careful of that. If it does hang up on the bottom, all you have to do is feed it a little bit of slack, and the current will back it right off the rocks. Contrary to popular belief, sinking lines don't get down all that deep. In other words, once I make my cast here, and I throw a mend in it, that fly's starting to sink down a little bit with the line, and it's still sinking, but now the current's picked up tight on the line, and it's beginning its broadside swing. Everything kind of lifts up in the water column a little bit. So even though I've got a fairly heavy tip on, it's about 190 grains, it's a Type 3, it's still only fishing about 2 feet below the surface. That's still good depth because this water is only 4 to 5 feet deep. I don't want to be scraping bottom during the swing. I just want that fly suspended about halfway between the surface and the substrate. It's important to turn the cast over cleanly when you're fishing with a sink tip line. It's important with a floating line, but it's even exacerbated more by a sink tip line. If my cast should fall in a heap, it's going to take quite a bit of time for it to straighten out. It might even hook up on the bottom before it has a chance to begin fishing. So if your cast is getting a little bit sloppy and it's starting to fall out there with a little bit of slack, just shorten up a little bit. It's more important to fish cleanly than it is distance. But I'd rather see someone fish at 50 feet with a clean cast than 80 feet and sloppy. Now if I were to cast more cross stream like this and put a big mend in the line, all I'm doing is wasting time because the fly line's sinking right now. It's sinking, I'm not fishing it. I'm still not fishing it. Right about now, it's just now straightened out in line with the belly of the fly line and I'm just now fishing it. The problem is that we just wasting a little bit of time. So it takes a little bit, there we go. Had a little bump there. There we go, there we go. Okay, hey, go. It's about time. We've got full sunlight on the water. Water temperature is about 49 degrees. I was surprised though, as it always is. I don't know how many casts I just made from the top end of this. Come on, little guy. Water's cold and the fish are gonna fight just a little bit easier in cool water. Now he saw me. Pretty fish. Come on, big girl. Beautiful. That's what I like right there. Beautiful job. Little hatchery female. Notice that we don't have an adipose clip on the back, just right above the tail fin. Beautiful fish. There we go. Yeah, the hook came out nice and easy. Just a nice hatchery female, and although I always prefer wild fish, this one was a beauty. Off you go, big girl. Really didn't expect that, but in this colder water, they always seem to take down here in this little softer flat. And it took quite a while for that fly to come through this soft, intermediate current speed in here. You've got to be patient and fish the fly clear to the end of the swing.